Welcome to another episode of the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. A progressive insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining podcast designed to shine a light on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters, located in his attic, here's the award-winning Pat Johnston.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to another edition of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I'm your host, Pat Johnston. And as we near Halloween, I have to tell you, I saw a scary clown outfit. I mean, maybe the scariest clown outfit of them all. And I think it was at a Pennsylvania McDonald's last week. Wait, I'm sorry. That was dear leader Donald Trump working the French fries machine. Okay, well, I mean, I'm sorry. It's not my fault. I saw the fake hair. I saw the makeup. I saw the clownish suit, and I just assumed it was some whack Ronald McDonald getup. But, you know, the real clownish part of the whole gig was that dear leader and his people did it not in an effort to promote the hard work that people do at various fast food joints across the nation each and every day. And it wasn't really to highlight the need of why the federal minimum wage must be raised to at least $15 to $17 an hour. I mean, you'd think that dear leader would fight for the workers, right? When has he ever done that? No, his visiting the Mickey D's was all because there's a belief in the weird MAGA world that Vice President Kamala Harris never really worked at a McDonald's, as she says she did. And it's all because, I guess, she didn't keep any kind of records, like, didn't keep her uniform, whatever, I don't know. But it's all about the show, the Trump show. And the corporate media love themselves the Trump show. That's why the New York Times and the Washington Post declined to run any front page stories about how Trump's former chief of staff, the ultra-conservative General John Kelly, and how he said in a New York Times interview, that Trump, quote unquote, certainly falls into the general definition of fascist for sure. Now, if I remember correctly, calling Trump the F word or his political white Christianist MAGA cult the F word was considered out of bounds. But there's dear leader's right-wing former chief of staff calling his former boss what we've always known him to be, a fascist. And as NBC News says, and I'm quoting John Kelly here, he commented more than once, that Hitler did some good things too. Kelly also told the New York Times that Trump meets the general definition of a fascist, as I just said. Ottawa County progressive activist and friend of the podcast, Joe Spalding, tweeted this week, F Hitler, F all of his generals, and F Donald Trump. To which I provided an attached thought saying, I recall a time when this was a commonly shared belief among Democrats and Republicans, to F Hitler and F all his generals. And, it was a shared belief between progressives and conservatives. But MAGA Republicans today, no, they endorse that view. This is what the Republican Party has become. And that is the absolute truth. And you know this to be true because just look how fellow Republicans are not running away from dear leader. No, they're rushing to his defense. All right, they're rushing to his defense even on his supposed admiration of Hitler. They are not running away from him. So it doesn't matter one bit that Trump celebrates Hitler to them or Putin or Kim Jong-un. It doesn't matter. They want him to be America's dictator because of freedom or something like that. Oh, cognitive dissonance. Wish you could be taught again. They want him to go after what he deems to be the enemy within, meaning progressives, Democrats, independents, or even some of those Republicans who have dared to oppose him. That's who he considers the enemy within, not the right-wing extremists who are causing all kinds of violence across this country. No, it is going after those who oppose him. They absolutely, let me tell you this, they absolutely love the fact that he called a deceased veteran a, quote, effing Mexican. Oh, let me tell you, that's the one that they love most about their guy. If you don't know what I'm talking about, U.S. Army soldier Vanessa Guillen was killed by a fellow soldier in Fort Hood, Texas back in 2020, which hasn't been, as Salon reminds us, that area of Fort Hood, Texas, hasn't been really the most friendly and open to women in the Army. Now, after the murder, Trump invited Guillen's family to the White House and then promised to pay for their funeral services. But as Salon reports, Trump was outraged when a bill for Guillen's funeral was submitted to the White House, The Atlantic reports. What did it cost? Trump asked his staff. When they informed him the total cost was $60,000, he was livid. It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican. Don't pay for it, Trump told his then chief of staff, Mark Meadows. The Guillen family attorney told The Atlantic that they were never reimbursed for the funeral. Trust me. Everyone, trust me when I tell you, the MAGA cult love that part the most because they deep down agree with it. Don't underestimate the power of white nationalism or white Christian nationalism within the cult. It is what they crave from him the most because it helps confirm that their racist beliefs are indeed justified. It's why they actually believe it's possible to forcibly deport millions of immigrants across the country. They really believe that. They think there will be no repercussions whatsoever, whether legally or economically. Thanks to CBS News, and I will give the corporate media credit when credit's due, CBS News analyzed the cost of deporting some 11 million people out of the country, both legally or illegally. And CBS found that apprehending and deporting just 1 million people could cost taxpayers around $20 billion. Deporting 11 million people over 4 years would cost more than 20 times what the nation spends a year over the last 5 years on deporting people living in the U.S. Most of that would be new funding that would have to be approved by a majority of both chambers in Congress. And assuming Trump did get the funding and could rapidly expand the staffing in immigration enforcement and courts, the backlog of cases would grow, not decrease. It would grow by millions of cases based on what's happened in the last two administrations. And Trump's own administration, despite promising to deport millions in 2016, deported over 325,000 people during the fiscal years he was in office. Guys, listen, this would not be only expensive to our economy, but it would be inhumane in tearing families apart. That's not what America's about. But let's just stick with some hard numbers here, okay? The CBS News analysis says it would cost somewhere between $40 to $54 billion a year during the next presidential term to do such an act. And CBS says even the lower end of the annual estimate, $40 billion, is enough to provide 20 million families each with a child tax credit each year and is more than double the Federal Emergency Management Agency's entire budget. Over 4 years, the sum, $160 to $216 billion, is comparable to the cost of constructing around 500,000 new homes across the country. See, we could do bigger and better things to help people, but no, millions of voters want to go down this road, and they have no idea what it would take and how much it would cost. Oh, not only would thousands of jobs be lost by deporting immigrants, but we'd end up losing billions in tax revenue. As CBS says, undocumented immigrants also paid $59.4 billion in federal taxes and $37.3 billion to state and local taxes, according to a study by the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. More than a third of those went to Medicaid, Social Security, and unemployment insurance. Wow. You talk about a major cut in revenues, there you have it. And you know what? Maybe that's also part of the plan, to cut revenue, thereby cutting government. And Trump and MAGA Republicans are the ones that we're supposed to trust more than Kamala Harris and the Democrats when it comes to the economy? Are we serious? Trump destroyed the American economy during the pandemic, and as former President Obama noted while in Detroit last week with Calvin Megatron Johnson and Eminem, Trump threw away the Obama administration's pandemic plans because it was the black guy's plans. But this can't be a shock. Anything this guy has touched has gone belly up, everything. And the only thing he successfully did in the White House was blow up the deficits when he passed huge tax cuts for his rich donor base and slash corporate tax rates, which I was told would lower prices. I mean, who really fell for that? Who really thought that was going to happen? But let's look more at the state level when it comes to how Democratic leadership is improving their economies. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, for instance, the unemployment rate is now 3.4%. 3.4%. That's lower than the pre-Biden-Harris unemployment rate of 4.1% from the year 2000, which was the lowest Pennsylvania unemployment rate at the time. So Pennsylvania's unemployment rate is right now the lowest it's ever been. Democratic leadership, everyone. And as I shared with you just a few weeks ago, Michigan's unemployment rate is hovering around 4.5%. However, the Michigan Center for Data and Analysis reported that Michigan's labor market hit historic levels in 2023 and continued to improve in the first 6 months of 2024. The state's unemployment rate was low for multiple demographic groups, while the number of jobs and labor force continued to expand. Looking forward, the recent projections indicate that any growth in the coming years will require more people moving to Michigan. You see, this is what an economic turnaround looks like, everyone. And this is what happens when you put Democrats into power to enact progressive, or as I say, common sense policies that'll help hard-working families. And of course, it'll help businesses as well. The business community, you have to recognize that. I mean, I sound like George Bailey again from It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, come on now, Mr. Potter. Doesn't that make them better citizens and better customers? Okay, that was a very, very poor Jimmy Stewart impersonation, but I tried. Everyone, it's really not that difficult to understand. And I think we're starting to see that national Democrats, including the Harris-Walz campaign, are taking notice of what's happening across the states. For example, here in Michigan, the RX Kids program is receiving some national attention this week as the Washington Post did a story on the program and the success it is having in the city of Flint. It is a Flint program. It's something that I've covered here a few times here on the show. It's a program that basically gives mothers in Flint $6,000 in the baby's first year. No strings attached, no means testing, no criteria has to be met. Just being a mother in Flint gets you the $6,000 for your baby's first year. And this is similar to a proposal that Kamala Harris has made into expanding the child tax credit. I think this is yet just another example of how progressive policies make sense, how and why they are popular, and why Democrats should be pressing these policies even more. And so far, we're learning what's happening in Flint is becoming a huge success. You see, progressive, populist policies are common sense policies. And that's just because they are popular policies. That's the equal opportunity economy, right? And MAGA Republicans have no response to it. They have no kind of challenge to these kinds of policies other than, hey, more tax cuts for corporations. Yeah, the party of the people, right? I mean, just look now how beginning this coming winter, the state's minimum wage will begin to rise up to the point where the tip credit will be completely phased out by the year 2030. This means that waitresses and waiters no longer have to rely on the whims of customers for their paychecks. They will receive a livable wage for their work no matter what. And workers will begin earning paid sick leave to help care for themselves and for their loved ones. And that wouldn't be possible here in Michigan without the state Supreme Court. That's why it is imperative that liberals keep the majority on the court, and we have to vote for Kyra Harris Bolden and Kimberly Thomas on the state Supreme Court. So please tell others to do the same. Keeping the court majority is vital. I mean, that's what's happening in Michigan. And we wonder why we're experiencing lots of success so far. So while the presidential election is indeed of the utmost importance to preserving our democracy and democratic institutions from Trump and his white Christian MAGA Republican Party, we must also concentrate on state races as well. Again, things happen faster at the state and local levels. Democrats have a slim majority right now in the state house, 2 seats. Gaining seats is an imperative as well. And that's why former Governor Rick Snyder, former Republican Governor Rick Snyder, and some big money donors are joining forces to help MAGA Republican nutjobs regain control of the state house from Democrats. Michigan Advance's Kyle Davidson caught up with good old Ricky Snyder, who's traveling around the state apparently helping Republican state house candidates with funding and whatnot. Now, you see, while Snyder did refuse to vote for Trump in 2020, he's all about inserting MAGA extremism back into our State House. Why? Because his feelings are hurt about the Democratic majority reversing his precious legacy of redistributing money back to his wealthy donors and destroying unions. Not to mention taking more abortion rights away from women as well. Rick Snyder told Michigan Advance that Democrats reversing right to work for less is what really makes him the most upset. Now, I seem to recall, I was around about a decade ago, and I seem to recall how Rick Snyder claimed that he never really wanted the state to become right to work for less, but he had to do it because unions forced him to do it. Now, Kyle Davidson from Michigan Advance wrote the following. During the 2023-24 legislative term, Michigan Democrats have dismantled a number of Snyder-era policies, including eliminating right to work for less, and the state's controversial third-grade reading law, axing the pension tax, and expanding the earned income tax credit, eliminating the Environmental Rules Review Committee, which opponents panned as a polluter panel after the board blocked the implementation of tougher PFAS standards in 2019. Rick Snyder and the Republican Party wanted us to continue to ingest PFAS. Bravo, Rick. Bravo. And by the way, Rick Snyder also credited Democratic policies as one of the factors that brought him back into Michigan politics. It wasn't about fascism on the rise within his ranks. It wasn't about authoritarianism being celebrated among his ranks. No, it was that Democrats have worked to help people across the state of Michigan. That is what angers him the most. He can't stand that policy is designed to help hardworking Michiganders. Policies that are helping the state's future economic and environmental health. That is something Rick Snyder cannot stand, and that is what Rick Snyder is hoping to reverse. Remember, Rick Snyder and the Republicans also fought really hard during the lame duck session in 2018 to keep Line 5 operating in the Straits of Mackinac. So the reason why that's still going on is because of Rick Snyder and the MAGA extremist base. So fighting for the preservation of democracy and our economic rebound is also on the line here in this election for the state of Michigan. And it's what I'm going to discuss with Sam Inglot, Executive Director of Progress Michigan, here in just a quick moment. And speaking of the election, let me just quickly finish this monologue by playing a spot from Democrat Kristen McDonald-Rivet. She's battling MAGA Republican Paul Young for Democrat Dan Kildee's seat in the 8th Congressional District. That includes Bay City, Saginaw, Frankenmuth, and that area. I mean, this is a crucial seat for Democrats to win if they hope to retake Congress. And I have to tell you, ads like this might just help.
They say politics comes down to who you want to have a beer with. So here goes. I'm Kristen McDonald-Rivet, and I'm running for Congress. My husband and I have 6 kids. I know, that's a lot. I used to run Michigan Head Start. Now in the state Senate, I'm fighting to lower drug prices and housing costs. And I helped pass the largest tax cut in state history. I root for the Lions, I hate Ohio, and I think most politicians are full of I'm Kristen McDonald-Rivet, and I approve this message. Cheers.
I wanted to play this for you because I believe that's a pretty smart ad, as McDonald-Rivet does a great job at appearing just normal. And that's another thing. Millions of Americans just want some kind of normalcy after some 8 years of the nihilistic MAGA cultism. We are tired of it. We just want normalcy. We want to be able to talk to family members again. We want to be able to talk to old friends again and not always have the topic go back to dear leader Trump. We are tired about talking about that buffoon. We just want some normalcy. And in less than 2 weeks, we can move on from this national nightmare. Sam Inglot from Progress Michigan is coming right up here to talk with me. You're listening to LOL.
It's Michigan's premier progressive podcast, Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. If Pat's brand of progressive pontifications is getting you all riled up and you'd like to give him a piece of your mind, or if you'd like to tell him he's doing an outstanding job and to keep up the great work, just email him. That's leftoflansing@gmail.com. Do you have stories you think Pat must know about or guest ideas for future episodes? That's leftoflansing@gmail.com. Want to share your thoughts on how to grow Michigan's population or which flavor of Faygo Pop is the best? It's rock and rye, by the way. Just email Pat, leftoflansing@gmail.com. Now, here's Pat.
Follow me on Twitter, the Gram, or the Facebook. My email is leftoflansing@gmail.com. Subscribe to the show on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. And please give it a 5-star review. I'd like that very, very much. Okay, with less than 2 weeks remaining and early voting starting this weekend, and of course, no reason absentee ballots are already returning to clerk's offices throughout the state, shall I say, collective anxiety is in the stratosphere right now as democracy and decency are on the line. Michigan, of course, is one of the main battleground states once again in this presidential election, as polls are showing a close race. But we've also got congressional races, a U.S. Senate seat up for grabs, and the future of the state Supreme Court hanging in the balance as well here in this election. So I wanted to bring Sam Inglot, the executive director at Progress Michigan, back here on the show to share his thoughts on what's happening or going to hopefully happen here in less than 2 weeks and the kinds of work that Progress Michigan has been engaged in to help inform everyone of what kind of future we could have on both the national and the state level if we defeat the extreme MAGA Republican Party at the polls. So, Sam, thanks so much for taking a few minutes here to talk with us this week.
Of course, Pat. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, you heard me talk about how it seems like that there is this collective anxiety that's pretty much on overdrive right now. Is that the sense you're getting while you're out and about here this campaign season?
There's no doubt about it, Pat. There's a lot happening, and there's a lot of work that's going on and a lot of work that remains to be done. You mentioned earlier some of the absentee ballots and stuff like that being returned and early voting happening. And I want to start out this, our conversation here by maybe alleviating some anxiety that folks have, because I know there's been a lot of talk from the MAGA side of the equation about how Michigan's elections are going to go. And I just want to say that from what I've seen, our local clerks, election officials, and election volunteers are just doing a bang-up job, making sure that folks have the right voting information, processing absentee ballots. We're seeing some record numbers of those early votes happening, which is amazing to see folks utilizing their hard-won voting rights. And now Michiganders are going to have an opportunity en masse to participate in early voting. So I think all of those things really bode well, because I strongly believe that the more people that we can have turn up to the polls, the brighter future that we can have. And I think the best way to relieve some of the anxiety folks are feeling is making sure that you as an individual have a voting plan, and get out and vote, and then encouraging folks in your immediate vicinity to do the same. Not just your friends that are going to vote and you're just like double checking with them, but talk to those folks, that are on the fringes that don't feel like maybe their vote matters or that maybe the process is too complicated, and share with them some resources, share with them the reasons you're voting, because as we've seen from previous elections, every single vote is going to matter in this upcoming election.
Sam, do you feel like we are better prepared this time around for any kind of shenanigans, post-election shenanigans, post-voting shenanigans that the Michigan Republican Party and others on that side will probably try to do again if they feel like that the election is not going their way?
It's already happening, Pat. There are a lot of bad actors out there trying to spread disinformation and fearmonger about our elections because of how they think people are going to vote. But the fact of the matter is, Michigan's elections are secure, accurate, and have tons of built-in safeguards to catch any potential problems long before any votes are tallied. And I can say this, when it comes to the election protection side of things and civic organizations and community groups making sure that folks have the information that they need to be able to vote, I feel like we are incredibly well prepared. And I think we've got in our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, somebody who's in charge of Michigan's elections, who really isn't putting up with any of the bull crap. We've seen bad actors like Elon Musk, especially as of late, spread a lot of disinformation about how Michiganders are going to vote. But there are a lot of groups who are mobilized and organizations that are working together, who are not only proactively combating that disinformation, but will be ready on election day and the days after to make sure that how voters decide is the decision of the day and not what political bad actors want it to be.
Just let this be a lesson to everybody when you were talking about how every vote counts, every race counts. We are lucky to have Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson in that position right now because we voted for her, and she's somebody who actually does believe in the democratic process, as opposed to her past two opponents who I don't think that they would have gone to the lengths that she has done to try to ensure that everybody's vote counts.
And Jocelyn Benson's going to fight tooth and nail. I mean, it doesn't matter how you vote, right? Whether you're voting Republican or Democrat, Jocelyn Benson is going to make sure that you have access to the ballot and that your vote is counted. And she's going to call out bad actors who are spreading disinformation. And she's, like I said, she's just doing a stellar job of making sure that people have accurate information about how Michigan's not only how voting works, but how the kind of back end and day of and day after election processes work. And I know that there's tons of organizations out there that are following a similar mission, making sure that regardless of who you are or where you live, you're going to be able to vote, and that we're going to protect those votes by ensuring that whatever voters decide is what carries the day.
Sam, forgive me because we haven't talked in a little while, and I would just like to get your take on this particular question. When President Joe Biden decided to step aside and Kamala Harris became the head of the Democratic Party and became the presidential candidate, could you sense a sudden change in the energy and enthusiasm here in our state when Vice President Harris became the candidate?
Oh, yeah, there was an absolute vibe shift. I mean, it made everything feel more fresh, feel more new. And I think a lot of the policy positions that she has talked about are really resonating with people. And I think you don't get much more of a stark contrast than between Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump as far as what their priorities are and whose side they're on when it comes to their vision for the country. So there was a definite shift there. I think a lot of people felt a little bit of wind in their sails after that. And I think that's going to carry through to Election Day.
You know, one policy difference, I would say, between the two of them easily is that one believes in democracy and the other obviously does not. Is it frustrating, Sam, though, that despite, you would say, such a stark contrast there and something so fundamental to this country's history and to this country's future, is it frustrating that you see numbers, poll numbers that are so close right now?
I wouldn't say frustrating is the right word. We live in a political world where you got to make the right pitch. I think we've seen from some polling that Harris's pitch is starting to pull some folks over to her side. And a lot of Trump's extreme rhetoric is, I think, really going to start alienating some people. And polls are polls, but it all matters what happens on Election Day. And I think when people start hearing about Trump wanting to detain and deport people, regardless of immigration status, when they start to hear about things like Project 2025, I think some of the veneer is starting to wear off on Donald Trump. I think that contrast is becoming more clear to people. But at the end of the day, it's going to be all about who shows up. You know, I know a lot of folks are working hard to turn folks out come Election Day.
I do agree with you. I think that Kamala Harris's economic policies especially are starting to really hit home because, like you said, you can't pay attention to all these polls. And I try my best not to. But she is closing that gap between her and Trump on who can best deal with the economy. Again, I just have to say, if you don't mind me going on just a quick tangent, it blows my mind that somebody looks at Donald Trump and says, yes, he knows how to work the economy. Somebody's failed at basically every venture he's ever undertaken his entire life. But still, she's still closing those numbers down, which is good on that side. But, you know, there's something else I think that Democrats like Kamala Harris, Alyssa Slotkin, and Democrats running for Congress and running for state house seats should really do is I think they should really hammer home in the final days how the policies they have passed and the policies they will continue to propose will help strengthen the economy and the pocketbooks of hard-working Michiganders. Now, I've been interviewing many state house candidates and progressives from rural counties across the state this year on how we can continue to make inroads with rural voters. And one way I think that we've been successful at doing so is by highlighting how Project 2025 is stating right there in black and white how it wants to attack some long-standing safety net programs that farmers and those living in rural areas have relied on for years. I know it's something that Progress Michigan has been examining as well here for a while. So, Sam, while I've got you here, would you mind talking about that a little bit more?
Obviously, Project 2025 is something that a lot of folks have talked about this year. And I think one of the things that's kind of important, I think, to note here, Pat, is like, I look at Project 2025 as not just an election year thing, right? This was developed, several years ago, and it's going to continue to exist after this election, regardless of the results. We know people have talked about it being a blueprint for Donald Trump's presidency. But even if Harris wins, it's still going to be there. We can expect that far-right officials and leaders are still going to be looking to this thing as a blueprint. And one of the things that we want to highlight, because I don't think necessarily it's gotten the attention that it deserves, is, how it would hurt rural Michigan and rural communities across the state, from tribal nations by defunding healthcare and education programs to ending some of the popular programs that farmers need to feed their communities. I think it would create a great deal of insecurity in rural America, as it would for the suburbs, the inner cities, and everywhere in between.
And I would have to believe, and in fact, I think I've seen this before with Project 2025 as part of the Farm Bill and all that, that they would really like to put more stringent work requirements and criteria on people just trying to receive food assistance. And that is so mind-boggling that they're still trying to do that to this day.
Oh, yeah. And then not only that, but they want to do things like eliminate Head Start, right? They want to make it so fewer workers are eligible for overtime. They want to eliminate worker protections in the National Labor Relations Board. So Project 2025 is bad for rural and urban workers, union and non-union workers. The only people who benefit from Project 2025 are those at the very top of the income bracket and those aligned with the likes of the Heritage Foundation and the DeVos family and the Mackinac Center for Public Policy.
And many of the people involved in Project 2025 did work with the Trump administration. So whenever he says, I don't really know anything about that, kind of hard to believe.
Oh, yeah. I mean, not only are the former Trump official fingerprints are all over it, but Donald Trump lies, Pat. He lies and makes up things all of the time. People should call a spade a spade. And the fact that Donald Trump is trying to distance himself, from Project 2025 and has gotten some spin from other Republican officials, I think goes to show you how unpopular it really is. And they know it's unpopular, but popularity has never stopped them from taking draconian, authoritarian, or other steps to help their corporate buddies in the past. So why should we expect anything different now?
We've been covering a bit here about the presidential election here in Michigan, what it could mean for Michigan, how Project 2025 will really hurt Michiganders throughout the entire state. But of course, another piece to this election puzzle is that we've got so many other races that will affect millions of people, millions of Michiganders, especially like the race for Michigan's U.S. Senate seat between Democrat Alyssa Slotkin and Republican Florida Mike Rogers. We've got some key congressional races that are up for grabs, and Michigan Democrats only hold a slim 2-seat advantage in the state house, which means if they lose the majority, it'll be that much harder for Governor Whitmer and for Senate Democrats to get some real positive policies passed to help everybody here for the next 2 years. And I think it's important that we stress to everybody that, yes, while what happens, of course, in the presidential race is indeed important, as I've always been saying, I know you've said it, I know others at Progress Michigan have said it, what happens on the local side is just as important. You know why? Because things happen faster on the state and also on the local level. So can you talk about that?
We've been talking about really, the presidential race a lot, right? I think one of the most important things for folks to remember is to fill out your entire ballot this year, from president to Senate, Congress, state house, down to your county positions and local positions in the Michigan Supreme Court. One of the best things that you can do to help drive this state in the direction that so many of us want it to go is to do your research, find the candidates who support your values, and make sure you fill out that entire ballot and leave no bubble unfilled. As for the state house, Pat, it's all going to be close this year, right? I'm not expecting a landslide kind of anywhere, and each House district is sort of its own special snowflake in a way. But obviously that Democratic trifecta, including the state house, has been critical with passing a lot of the progressive policies that we've seen, from common sense gun violence prevention measures to restoring worker rights and worker protections and protecting abortion access in the LGBTQ community. The state house doesn't necessarily get the headlines that presidential elections do, but like, damn, in Michigan, who is in control of the state house really does make a difference. And I know there are a lot of people out there working hard, and Democrats have done a good job of getting a resume together over the last few years to make the case for why they should continue to get folks support in November.
Right. And especially here, like just with Democrats in Michigan getting control of the state legislature for the first time in 40 years, they were able to pass a lot of the things that you just mentioned, but also something that is always celebrated and receives like a huge ovation every time the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, talks about how Minnesota passed a bill giving school kids free breakfast and lunch. That's happening here in Michigan, too, which is why those state house races are so vital.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I'm seeing things where there's this connection, right, between the good things and the common sense policies that we pass here in Michigan and what we're seeing from a potential Harris-Walz administration, right? Policies that help people and families, right? We should be feeding kids. We should make sure that parents have the resources to take care of their kids. And again, just going back to the contrast piece, that's why like the elimination of Head Start, which is outlined in Project 2025, should be a very scary prospect for folks. And this election, I don't think, though, either is about fear. I really think it is about opportunity and what can be. And I think at the state level and at the federal level, we're continuing to see that contrast. And we want to keep the good things that have happened in Michigan. We want those to happen again, and not just in Michigan, but across the entire country.
All right, Sam, I've taken up too much of your time. If people would like to learn more about Progress Michigan and the work that you find people do over there, how can they find you?
Yeah, you can find us at Progress Michigan and then progressmichigan.org. That's our website. You can find us over on Instagram, Twitter, I'm not calling it X, Facebook, and we've got one hell of a TikTok going too. You can check us out there.
Awesome. And I call it Twitter as well. Sam Inglot, Executive Director of Progress Michigan, thanks so much for being on and for all the hard work that Progress Michigan is doing to ensure that we are also not going back. So thanks for everything you're doing.
Thank you, Pat. And to everyone listening, if you need good voting information, check out michiganvoting.org. It's a hell of a resource for folks, for yourself and for sharing with others.
He spent nearly 25 years working as a liberal voice in conservative talk radio across the state, and he's still a somewhat stable person. It's the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. You can find archives of the podcast, plus Pat's musings on other topics in written form at leftoflansing.com. Left of Lansing archives are available wherever you get your podcasts. And now Left of Lansing is available on YouTube. We'd like to thank Audio Boom for distributing all our episodes so we can share progressive, otherwise known as common sense, values across Michigan and the country. Now, here's Pat Johnston.
Thanks again to Sam Inglot from Progress Michigan for joining me again here this week. And thanks to Sam for reminding all of us to visit michiganvoting.org for all of your voting information. That's michiganvoting.org, and I will provide links to wherever you are listening to this podcast. Time now for the Left of Lansing Last Call. So, Travis Hellwig from the Happy Foot, Sad Foot podcast and former head writer for Crooked Media sent out this tweet last weekend, and I wanted to share it with you because it's something that I've heard talked about a lot here lately, and that's how Democrats are supposedly losing Gen Z men. Mr. Hellwig posted, and I'm going to quote here, "If Kamala Harris loses, which is very possible, there needs to be a real discussion about how Democrats speak to and reach young men. There are a few straight men under 40 in the Democratic consultant class, so when ads try to reach young men, they come off deeply inauthentic. We take for granted that young people will always be left, but if the young male vote ends up even close to what some polling is saying, it will be years of electoral disaster for Democrats. These voters are reachable, but we struggle to talk to them in a way that is not annoying. To be clear, I'm not saying we need to worry about women less or change any positions. I'm saying the polling around young men is concerning, and if it turns out to be true, we need to have a discussion about how condescending we are coming off to a huge part of the electorate." Okay, so again, Travis Hellwig isn't the first to talk about this supposed phenomenon. But it's something that I've yet to really see any real hard data on just yet, but maybe it's something we'll have to see when hard voting data results become public here in a few weeks. I'm still not exactly sure, though, what the complaint is about Gen Z men. And even more, I'm not exactly sure how Democrats are supposed to fix this phenomenon affecting younger men. How are we as progressives supposed to reach young men who turn to bro culture and are influenced by the fake machoism by various podcasters and influencers? I don't know what to really do about that. And I'm not sure what to do about their loneliness. I am also not sure how we're being condescending to younger men. Progressives are the ones that are passing policies both on a national and state level, well, at least in, blue states, which are designed to help their economic futures. And that can also help your mental health as well. I don't know. I guess I don't know what the hell the complaint is all about here. I've heard that young men are lonely nowadays, and maybe that's an overall societal issue. Maybe it's this macho male myth that we throw onto boys that they have to be tough and they have to be guarded, while girls are taught to be more open and to have more close friendships. Maybe it's the gaming culture. I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that some guys are just unable to talk to women nowadays without being dicks. I saw some guy post something on social media the other day arguing that the Jack Nicholson character in A Few Good Men was actually the good guy. Now, I see those kinds of statements, and look, I know that they're just trying to get a rise out of people and they're just trying to get clicks. But when you read the responses from other men, some of whom said that the Nicholson character was indeed the good guy who got punished for just trying to keep the country safe, well, I see that as a microcosm of a big problem. Being a jerk and pretending that you've always got to be hardcore and obnoxious is being taught to some of these young men. And someone has to tell them that's not really the way to entice people to want to be hanging out with you. No one is supposed to aspire to be the Jonah Ryan character from Veep. Well, actually, you're not supposed to aspire to be anyone in Veep, really. I just think that men have to figure it out for themselves and realize that being kind and understanding is also part of being an alpha male. Being a douche is not alpha male. Being a douche drives most people away. Columnist Diane Roberts from Florida Phoenix wrote an awesome column about the fragility of men here lately, and she concluded her column by saying, "Tell me again why we should worry about men's fragile egos and tormented souls when they spend their lives trying to control our bodies." It's a perfect point. If young men are not able to get that simple message, well, then I'm not sure what the Democratic Party is supposed to do to save them, or even if they can be, quote unquote, saved. Just for starters, though, according to me, don't be jerks.
You're listening to the Left of Lansing podcast. The music you're hearing is by Wanderbeats. To hear the latest project, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site. Now back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Left of Lansing. Special thanks to Sam Inglot from Progress, Michigan for coming on and sharing his thoughts and some valuable information about this election. And remember, you can always email me. That's leftoflansing@gmail.com. I know many of you are working tirelessly right now to ensure that democracy survives. But if you do feel yourself getting filled with a little too much anxiety, try sitting back for a bit on Saturday night and just watch the Michigan MSU game, which, by the way, I am predicting will be a 20-16 victory for the Spartans. Didn't think I'd be making that prediction a couple of months ago. Or since it's nearing Halloween, watch some good scary thrillers. For me, I tend to like the old school horror movies a bit more, like Hitchcock's Psycho, which proved the less you show, the more scared you can get. Sort of like Jaws. Or the 1931 Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movie with Frederick March, not the one with Spencer Tracy. The one with Frederick March is much darker, and it's also got Miriam Hopkins, who is supposedly a big-time FDR supporter. And I don't care what anyone says, the last few seconds of The Blair Witch still freaks the hell out of me. And you're probably asking, Pat, how does that help with your anxiety? Trust me, that helps with my anxiety. It makes me forget about the real world for just a little bit. Do whatever works best for you. But then get back into the game, because we need to get as many people to the polls as possible. As Sam told us, after you vote, work on getting friends, neighbors, and others to the polls, because every single vote counts. Until next time, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan.
The Left of Lansing podcast was produced by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and hosted by, yes, Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. And thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. Remember to visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to the Left of Lansing podcast.